Mixing with my career building tip, making big decisions. There are always crossroads or certain big decisions that we make in our lives and in particular in our careers that really set a path forward for what happens. And those decisions don't necessarily make or break a career, but you certainly have to be able to balance your willingness to take risks with your gut instincts about what is the right thing to do. And it also challenges how much you really want to do something. So let me tell you a little bit of a story. For myself, in the late 80s, early 90s, I was working as a staff engineer out of Electric Lady Studios. And at the time, I had been doing a variety of mixing work. I was doing some mixing work for Eddie Kramer, for like a variety of producers. I had been for a short time there an assistant engineer, and eventually sort of became like a staff engineer. So I still assisted on some sessions, but primarily did engineering work that came in through the studio. And the limitations of that for me was that if I were engineering some gig and I was say making $50 an hour, the I would get paid through the recording studio, and so the recording studio would bill the record company $100 an hour and pay me 50, or bill them 75 and pay me 50 or 35. And of course, I would take the gig because I wanted the experience. I was making the connections, and I knew that this was going on. It wasn't necessarily some kind of a hidden thing. And hey, look, they were getting me work, right? And so if a manager were to get you work, they would take a cut, 15, 20% or something like that. This is obviously a bit higher, but that's part of the way that the studio world worked at the time. So the goal really for me was not to be a staff engineer working at a studio, but to be an independent engineer, because the independent engineer would then be billing the record company $100 an hour. And of course, you would have to deal with the negotiations, and you would have to deal with the connections and booking the gigs and all that sort of stuff. So the goal for me was to build as many clients, as big of a client base as I could, so I could depart and go on to be an engineer, and full time independent engineer. And I came across a session where I was working on a James Taylor record. It was a James Taylor live record. I could talk a lot about that and a whole other career building tip about what exactly it was, but that wasn't the important thing. One of the reasons why I took the gig was the person who was producing, Don Grolnick, who had produced, he's a jazz artist and produced a bunch of great records that I liked. I had met him in the past. And James Taylor, who I was a big fan of, who was the artist, obviously. And George Massenburg was also a co-producer and engineer for the project. And they came into Electric Lady. They needed an assistant. They wanted to work on the Focusrite console. I was the expert. And for me, taking an assistant gig for that was worthwhile, because George Massenburg is an historic figure in the history of music production and engineering. He has his own company, Massenburg Labs. They built automation systems, unbelievable sounding equalizers and compressors. The guy is a genius, almost beyond parallel in terms of the music industry. I've never seen anybody who was as smart and so quick to work in. I think great sense of humor, really just like one of the most amazing people I ever worked with. And I really busted my tail on this project and ended up doing a lot of the engineering work, and it became a launch point. So the record we were not able to finish within the time frame, and I don't think they expected to, but they needed to finish the rest of the record in Los Angeles, and they wanted me to come out there to continue with the engineering and mixing work, and to help them finish the record. So this was, of course, exactly what I couldn't have wanted or asked for anything more. Here I was working with an engineering idol of mine, someone whose records I was following all the way from back in college. And here I was working for him, and all of a sudden he's trusting me to engineer and do things for him. And I thought, this is just insane. It's almost too good to be true. And so I flew out to LA, and we were out in LA for over a month working on this record, finishing it. And it was an incredible experience. And part of what happened there was sort of an interesting decision point in my life. And I bring this up because one of the things you might think is like every time an opportunity comes up, the most important thing you do for that big decision is you take it. Regardless, you just take it. You take it. And while I really loved doing this gig and I loved being out there doing it, I was not really an LA guy. And I was just like, at that time in my life, I was about as East Coast New York of a guy as there was, and I was a studio rat. I was in the recording studios all the time. I had what they call a studio tan, which is basically no tan. It's where it's just so pale that you start to turn other colors, not healthy at all by any stretch of the imagination. But, that was kind of my thing. I really loved New York at that time. And I was offered an opportunity to work at Ocean Way Studios. I sat down with Alan Sides. He offered me a job to be an assistant / staff engineer at the studios out there. And George kind of wanted me out there to be someone who would work with him on projects, but he wasn't working on productions consistently. So I might be off for an entire year and not work with him, and all of a sudden he would call me up and want me to work on something. And for me, what I went to at that point when I was deciding whether to take this gig or not is I went to my gut instinct. And my gut, for some reason, although everything on the surface looked perfect and looked amazing, here was like, it wasn't like I was going from Electric Lady Studios to some, 2-bit basement studio. I was going to Ocean Way Studios, one of the all-time great recording studios in the history of recording. And working with Alan Sides, and I remember walking through the studios. It's like, there's the studio where a lot of the Beach Boys records were recorded, and it still had the same shag rug in there that was there when they recorded. And the studios were amazing, and they just had the most insane mic collection, and the equipment was just impeccably maintained. It was just really just such a dream studio, and I loved working there while we were finishing up the record there. But something said, don't take it. And I decided not to take it. And so I turned down the job and really, was about as gracious as I could be. It's like, almost like staring at me. It's like, are you out of your mind? But something just said no. And I went back to New York, and I decided from that point that it was time for me to launch my career and become an independent engineer. So I just went about and decided that I would do that. I went about and did that. I had all this work lined up for the summer. And then for whatever reason, record company budgets, I can't remember exactly what happened at the time. Sales might have been low for that particular year or something. Record companies pulled back their budgets, and I did almost nothing that entire summer. I had a summer off, and I ended up playing tennis with another engineering friend of mine all summer long. We hardly had any gigs. There was like no work, like nothing. And exactly what I felt was, man, did I really blow it? Did I really, turn down this opportunity that, where, I could have walked into this completely different situation, or, did I really make the right decision? And when I would question myself, I would still always go back to my gut, and my gut would always say, you know what, you made the right decision, and now you just have to kind of ride out this time here. And I think what happened was so much more valuable. I mean, I will never know what would have happened if I had taken that gig. However, what did end up happening is that I continued to do a lot of engineering work. I reconnected with Whitney Houston. I helped her work and rebuild her new world-class studio. I ended up recording like another 6 records with her. I ended up connecting with all kinds of amazing other artists. I ended up recording the Rolling Stones, the Brecker Brothers, Carly Simon. I actually, oddly enough, I recorded James Taylor and Carly Simon's daughter and their son on different records. So there's some kind of family connection in there. And many of the other records that are on my discography, like, Luther Vandross and all these people, David Bowie, David Byrne, Talking Heads, and all of these opportunities and these gigs came to me in New York. So when I look back, I say, well, who knows who I would have connected with in LA? But I think for me, I realized that my heart and soul was in New York. and that's where I needed to be. And so the moral of this whole story, the reason why I talk about making big decisions in this career building tip, is that really, when you come to some decision point, when you're making a major decision in your life about, a career direction change, a move, a different way of approaching things, do you want to invest with a group of people into a commercial recording studio or a record company venture or whatever? You always need to go to your gut and trust your gut instinct. What is it that your gut is telling you about it? Do you feel really uneasy about it? Or do you feel, is there something that says take it, even though you feel nervous or you feel uneasy about it? Because your gut will never lie to you. And it may look like that at first, just the same way that it looked like that for me when I came back to New York and all my work disappeared. Um, but in the long term, it paid off. It's almost like an initiation. When you make a decision like that, it's almost like, okay, how much do you really want it? And then you get challenged to see what your resolve is, how much you're really into it, how much are you really willing to give up, how much time and effort are you willing to put into it to make it happen. And if you continue on that and you do that, you will realize all the things that you want to do and accomplish so many more things that you could not have ever possibly have ever dreamed of. But only if you make that decision and you make it from the right place, not out of fear, not out of being nervous, not out of the safe thing to do, but out of the thing that your gut tells you is the right thing to do. It'll always lead you in the right direction. So there's a mixing with my career building tip and about making big decisions.